Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com with another video on PHP. And in this video, you know me. I don't know, every time I say PHP, it's just hard not to say you know me afterwards. But what we're going to be doing is functions. Okay, so functions, what does it mean? It means I can do a clump of code that I can call by its name at any time I want. So your most basic function would be something like this. So I'd just be like function hello world. I'm gonna pass in no arguments. Okay, and then here you would define what this function does when you use it, which we're just gonna echo hello world, and that's all this function does. And again, we need semicolons because PHP is very particular about that. And now I can use this function as many times as I want. Hello world. Hello world. And I don't have to type all that stuff over and over again. I mean, in this particular example, probably not a huge time save, but for my semicolons. But now if I run this, I should see hello world 3 times. See, hello world, hello world, hello world. Okay, cool. So that's what a function does. There are other ways to write a function. We'll come back to that. First, let's just kind of delve into things we can do with a function. Let's say I don't want it to just say hello world every time. And what I want it to do is I want to say a particular word. Okay, so we pass in a variable, say word. So whatever word you pass in is what it will say. And if you want, you can actually type it. So I'm pretty sure if I can just put string right here before it now. And this is a newer thing you can do. So let's see here. What is scalar type hints are available in PHP7 only. Yep. So yeah, so as it says, this is something that's only available in PHP7 and above. Okay, which I guess this is not automatically behaving in. Let's see if it tells me anywhere what version of PHP it's using off the bat. But I'll just switch to PHP7. Okay, cool. Because again, this video series is based on PHP7, so I encourage you to update your PHP on your computer. And the benefit of typing, so when I do this, when I say, hey, this variable word is supposed to be a string, is just that if someone puts something into the function that's not a string, it'll generate an error that explains them why that's a problem. Okay, and this just makes better errors, because if I just get an error and it just says your function didn't work because it was an error somewhere in the function, that's going to take me a little bit longer to figure out why than if you put a type and then I pass in something like a number or an integer, and then it tells me, hey, you passed in an integer when I was looking for a string, then I know, okay, that's what I did wrong. So typing makes it if I'm reading your code, so if I read the source code for your function, I know exactly what I'm supposed to be putting in. And 2, makes it where the errors are more descriptive, which just makes debugging easier, especially when you're working in larger teams. Okay, and that's always sort of been the issue with like JavaScript and PHP in the past, where as you work in larger teams to develop more robust applications for the web, without typing, it made it just much harder to manage that code in larger teams. So both languages have kind of moved in the direction to provide those tools. So PHP has added typing outright in PHP7 going forward, and JavaScript, Microsoft created something called TypeScript that basically allows typing. So just to give you some context on why typing matters. But I'm going to type just because it's a good habit. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to type. So we're going to have this variable called word, and really I just want to echo word. Okay, cool. So now when I use the function, and then I also want to have a new line, so I'll just concatenate a new line on there. Okay, so now I can do hello world, and I can pass in a string. So the first time we'll just do hello world. Okay, and that's one thing I like about these JetBrains IDEs, is that when you're using a function, it'll actually tell you which parameter you're using. So now it knows that when I pass in hello world, that it's filling in the gap that word is filling in here. So that way I know, okay, anywhere word is where hello world will be kind of filled in. And that doesn't always happen in all IDEs. That's just kind of a nice little bonus with JetBrains. In this case, PHPStorm. Hello world. Let's use the function again. This time the word will be goodbye world. Okay, so I'm passing in two different functions, and again, I gotta put semicolons behind everything. It'd be nice if it did that for me, but I'm sure there's some sort of extension that does that, but I'll let it go. I should get in the habit. Okay, so now if I run the code, see, I see hello world, goodbye world. Okay, it worked. Isn't that very cool? But here's the thing, this is fine, but all this is really doing is just printing some words to the screen. I might want to get the actual value back so I can do other things with it. So instead of echoing it, what I should do is I should return the value. So I'll replace this keyword with return. So what it does is that, essentially, think about it, is like I run this function and it comes back to me with some data. So instead of it just going out, printing the words to the screen and never coming back with me with anything, this time it'll just come back to me with those words. But watch what happens. Now if I run the code, nothing gets printed. Why? Because nothing is printing to the screen anymore. I need to actually go back forward and then add an echo in front of these, so that way I'm echoing the result of the function. Because the return doesn't print to the screen, it just brings me the value. I can do something with the value, but I got to do something with the value. So in this case, I'm going to echo the result of this function, which is the value it returns. Okay, now all functions return a value, but when it returns a value, you have to make sure that you do something with it, whether you assign it to a variable, or you echo it, or whatever you wanted to do with it. Essentially, this is the equivalent of the return value. Okay, that's one way you can think about it. It's like in your mind, this is literally the same thing as putting in the return value there. Cool. So now if I run this, hello world, goodbye world. Yay! So what did we learn? We can create a function. We put the name of the function. We put the parameters, and you can put as many parameters as you want. So I could be here and say integer, I think is another type, and we'll just say integer just means a whole number, and we'll just say num. So I'll say integer word dot space dot num dot new line. Okay, so now I have to pass in a number, so I'll just add a number to these. 5, 6. Okay, and see, that gets marked as num because it's the second thing I passed in. And I do PHP test. What's it complaining about? Let's see here. Uncut type error. Argument 2 passed into hello world must be an instance of integer. An int is given. Ah. So really what I want to do is int. There we go. So, see, that was a very useful error. That kind of made it very clear what I need to do. Okay. Cool. So that works. See, hello world 5, hello world 6. And so you see what happens when you pass in a variable that it doesn't recognize based on how you typed it. So now if I were to go in here and pass in, let's say, the number 6 instead of a string of hello world, okay, it should complain again. It's going to be like, hey, word is supposed to be a string. Or it just translates it to a string, I guess, in that case. Let's see what happens if I made it a float, which is a decimal number. Just letting it get by. Interesting. Okay. I guess it's not perfect. But let's also try something else. Usually in most languages, I don't know about in PHP, I haven't looked this up or tried it in PHP yet, but usually what you can do is you can do an equal sign in the definition of the function here and name a default value. So we'll say the default is hello world. And I'm assuming if it doesn't give me any kind of weird coloring or like red lines, it's working. So in this case, we'll say the default is 1. So now if I just take all this stuff out of the function, what happens is that since I didn't assign a value for word and for num, it'll just use the defaults. So let's see if that's true. And it works. See, hello world 1. Okay, so you can set up default values that way. So that's pretty nice. And now, this pretty much shows you kind of the different things you can do with a function. Aside from that, the logic that's in here can be as complicated and as long as you want. Okay, just think of, the best way to think about it is to think about things that you're going to do more than once. And if you're creating a function for a larger task, think if you can break that larger task into smaller functions, because maybe the smaller pieces of that task are reusable. So if I were to convert a number into a string and reverse it, I might make a different one function to convert to a string and then another function to reverse it, because I might not always need to do both, but I might be in different situations where I need one or the other. Okay, so don't always just think about your function as what you're trying to do now. Think about the pieces of what you're trying to do now, and can you break them down into multiple functions? One, it'll be easier to write smaller, simpler functions, and two, you'll find that you won't have to redo as much code because those simpler functions are available to you to redo those smaller pieces. And that just makes life easier. I'll show you two other ways to do functions. So again, when you do a function like this with the curly brackets, the code in there can be as complicated as you want and as long as you want. Another way to do a function is like this, where you assign it to a variable. So we'll say my func equals function, no parameters, echo hello world. Cool. And that is a function. Okay, this is just assigning it to a variable. This is what's referred to as an anonymous function, because the function never got a name. I never put a name like right here. It's a value, so think of it as like you have a number that's a value, or a string that's a value, or a boolean that's a value. A function is something that can be passed around between variables as well. It can be passed as arguments into other functions and all that fun stuff. So I can just now use my func, okay, and do it that way. Okay, page syntax error expected, unexpected my func. Maybe it wants me to do this. Let me think about that. Oh, I see. I forgot a semicolon, because this is a variable assignment, so that is a command that gets a semicolon right there. It's not like a normal function that doesn't get a semicolon. Again, difference between a variable declaration versus and then this also needs a semicolon. Okay, so let's run that code. And now we got a different error. Call to undefined function my func. Oh, I have to put the $sign back. Doot. And there we go. Hello world, it works. And the last way you can define a function is, this is very new for, I think, literally 7.4 is when this is introduced. So basically, you have to have sort of the newest version of PHP at the time that I'm recording this to do this. What you can do, this should look familiar if you've used like Ruby or JavaScript before, but it's a little bit different. So use fn for function, okay, and then you have your parameters here just like normal. The only difference here is that you have to have only one expression. It can be a complicated expression, but it can be like a other function with the curly brackets where you have like lots of different commands. It's just one expression. So I could be like, 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5. I can do this, but the idea is that it's going to return whatever the result of the expression afterwards. So everything has to be resolved into one final expression. Okay, the purpose of this is just to write really quick functions. If you're just doing something really simple, so let's say I wanted to do like add two numbers, so I just do x, y, and so what I want to return is x plus y. Okay, cool. So that's, and then again, let's put that needs a semicolon. Okay, and it's complaining a little bit. So let's see here, repetition of parameters is not allowed. Oh, yeah, it's $signs. I need $signs. Forget, I'm in PHP right now. There we go. Why is it complaining about the function? Okay, so it wants me to go all the way up to 7.4 level. So let's do that. There we go. Okay. So now I can be like my func 5 and 5. Let's add those numbers. And I want to echo the result of that. So echo semicolon. And that should just give you a 5. Or 10. Plus 5 is 10. And there you go. See, so that's very, very new. I think very cutting edge PHP with arrow functions. Okay, so again, that specifically you have to be up to 7.4. So if you are using a version of PHP which is earlier than 7.4, which nowadays is probably very likely depending on who your host is, and if you don't have control over what PHP version you're using, you probably won't have access to that feature. But trust me, not a bad thing to practice and get used to, because I imagine it's going to be a big thing in PHP development in the years to come. I will see you guys in the next video. That's functions. Have a great day and enjoy.